Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. On the unexpected death of his father, Keith Rupert Murdoch became the proprietor of the Adelaide News at the age of 22. Today, some 5.5 decades later, Rupert Murdoch owns the controlling interest in the News Corporation, which in turn owns media properties on 5 continents. Properties that include some 170 newspapers, dozens of television stations, half a dozen television networks, a publishing company, and a movie studio. The number of people who every day receive news or entertainment from a property owned by the man seated across the table from me is some 200 million. Rupert Murdoch, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Peter.
We'll talk in a moment about your underlying approach to business, but first, one perfectly straightforward question. When in July 2007, the News Corporation purchased Dow Jones, you paid $5 billion, or $60 a share, which was a premium of about 2/3 over the share price before news of your offer became public. Why was Dow Jones worth $2 billion more to you than it was to the market? Why did you see value that the market didn't see?
Oh, we saw in the Wall Street Journal and in the whole business of financial information, a great central franchise there, and something that we could develop as a national newspaper that would be unique in this country. And that's what we're still working at very hard. And but the price was, it was a bit of it, it's a bit like us, a bit of it was held in voting shares by a tight family that turned out to be not quite so tight. And to get them to break or to move, $6 was the sort of magic number.
I see.
Per share.
Well, of course, since you purchased, the advertising world has collapsed, and
it was different times.
Of course, it was different.
I mean, today they would have been giving it to you probably.
So, but no regrets about the purchase or the price you paid at the time. All right. Segment 1. On the cusp. Rupert Murdoch, February 2010. I'm quoting you. The News Corporation is on the cusp of a digital dynasty. Content is not just king, it is the emperor. Close quote. Explain yourself.
It's funny because Steve Jobs was in yesterday showing his new iPad, and I went through that with him again. I said, look, you can invent all these things, and they're wonderful and brilliant, but they mean nothing if you haven't got content to put on them. And he agreed completely. You can have iPhones, anything you like. If you can't do all these, someone's got to supply the information.
Okay. So I want to get back to the digital world, the electronic world in a moment, but first let's go to the business to which you've dedicated most of your life, newspapers. 2 sets of figures. September 2007, just over a month after your purchase of the Wall Street Journal. Total paid weekday circulation for the Wall Street Journal, 2,011,882. Total paid weekday circulation for the New York Times, 1,665. October 2009, the figure for the Wall Street Journal is 2,024,000, up about 0.5%. Circulation for the New York Times, 927,000, down more than 7%. And the New York Times wasn't alone. Of the 10 biggest newspapers in the country, over that period, only one, the Wall Street Journal, increased circulation. How did you do that?
I think we just kept improving the quality. We didn't do any special promotions. In fact, we put the price up for subscriptions. But we slowly brought in and widened the paper, made it better, more reliable. I think it has much greater judgment now and coverage of foreign news. We have wonderful correspondents. We've improved our Washington coverage greatly. We've got a long way to go in a lot of areas yet. But we want to widen this audience and specialize in some other areas too, such as health and so on.
And that doesn't place at risk the franchise of the business information, the business audience. You believe you can retain that audience while broadening it to make it a truly national newspaper.
Absolutely. It's called the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
But for 50 years, they've been saying it's the Main Street Journal. It is for the small business owner or businessman or person involved in business anyway, all across the country. It's not just for Wall Street bankers.
David Carr, writing in the New York Times, Carr says that Robert Thompson, the managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, and Gerard Baker, the deputy managing editor, quote, The two men have had a big impact on the paper's Washington coverage, adopting a more conservative tone and editing and headlining articles to reflect chronic skepticism of the current administration, close quote. Fair?
I don't think it's become conservative. Maybe a little more balanced. If you read into every story, very carefully, it certainly hasn't become conservative. Were there in the past a few correspondents there who had a bit of a left-wing tinge in the way they covered stories? Yes, probably.
According to the Gallup organization, 20% of Americans call themselves liberals. 40% call themselves conservative. I think we can accept, given the various polls that have been done through the years, the various newsroom surveys, that overwhelmingly newspapers in this country are dominated by editors and reporters who are liberal. Why shouldn't the Wall Street Journal be quite straightforward about saying we intend to be a newspaper for the rest of Americans, and incidentally, that market is twice as large? Or is there a danger in being explicit about it? How do you think that through?
We want to be objective as one can be, and as fair as one can be, and we think the rest of the press is monolithically, very often, unfair. But you forgot to mention the 40% of America who call themselves independents.
Yes.
Now, they're people who don't like either party. They're not about to join the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. This country is, I say, vaguely center-right in mood. And if you look at me and a few people, you might say we're a little bit more right than that. But the paper, I don't think there's no question that the editorial right of the opinion pages at the back of the paper, at the front section, are consistently take a pretty conservative attitude. They never endorse candidates, right, but they look very skeptically at big government and what's going on in Washington.
All right. Segment 2, Newspapers in the Electronic Age. Let me quote A Golden Age of Freedom. This is a book based on the Boyer lectures you gave in Australia. This is not available on Amazon. It's only available in Australia, by the way. But let me quote you. I have a simple and provocative proposition. Whinging about technology will get you nowhere. The more serious challenge is the complacency and condescension that festers at the heart of some newsrooms. Close quote. Would you care to name any of those newsrooms?
Yeah, but I think most newsrooms are very concerned. Lots of jobs, lots of circulation, what's happening, lots of readership to the internet, and don't see really what they are. Newspapers seen as tangible, tactile things.
Right.
I think we've got to look at these organizations as news organizations, so that we don't mind how our words are read by the public, whether they're on the new iPad or the Kindle or other things that are coming, or on paper itself. But the words should be the same.
All right. Last summer, former CBS anchor Dan Rather delivered an address at the Aspen Institute, during which he actually became teary-eyed. Let me quote him. "It's time the government made an effort to ensure the survival of the free press. If we do nothing more than stand back and hope that innovation alone will solve this crisis, then our best trained journalists will lose their jobs." Close quote. The government is bailing out the banks. The government is bailing out the auto industries. Why shouldn't the government bail out the newspaper business?
I think he's talking rubbish, and very dangerous rubbish. We don't want government money. In that we want a free press. It's essential to the democracy that we have a free and, as far as possible, competitive press, or competitive information industry, if you will. You won't get that if you start having government dollars coming in.
Now, to quote again from the Golden Age of Freedom, readers want what they've always wanted, a source they can trust. In short, we are moving from newspapers to news brands. Explain what you mean by brand in that context.
Well, I think the Wall Street Journal, maybe the New York Times, maybe the London Times, maybe New York Post for that matter, are known for what they are, and read and enjoyed for what they are. And I think they should keep that, and we've got to strengthen those brands very much, because as the old printed newspaper becomes less and the new electronic newspaper becomes much more, the cost of entry into competition is going to be a lot easier. Which is a great thing for the country. It's not so good for companies like mine. So we have to protect ourselves by getting better and better and being trusted, just 100%.
So that I've got here today's New York Post and the Journal, and of course you can see in the physical object you've got a lot of ways of communicating the brand. Here's the New York Post, the shape of the paper, the feel of it says tabloid. The Journal, we've got a sort of a classy broadsheet and feel, the size of the headlines, the placement of the photos, and you can communicate the brand, the feel of the newspaper is literally in some ways the feel of the newspaper.
I love it. But you see, it so happens, New York Post, they tabloid, well that means in America. In fact, we are on exactly the same story, which is the economic crisis, as the Wall Street Journal is. And naturally, being a popular paper, we're on about the Super Bowl, which is 2 days away. Right.
But when you look at these, when you reduce this Post and the Journal to the iPad that Steve Jobs was showing you yesterday, same size screen, totally flat, pixels. In other words, isn't it going to be harder to communicate a feel for a paper, to communicate the brand over the internet?
No, I don't think so. We're working very hard at that. Some people may lose it. I think if it just comes out looking like a .com, if you will, you're in great danger of losing it.
So design is going to be essential.
Design
the
and
feel
presentation.
Of the story.
Yes, and we'll be, in there we're doing a lot of work now. We've got people working all over the world on it, and as other people have. And there'll be many experiments, and we'll see, how people really like to read their news.
Right. Let me. This business about the barriers to entry dropping, and the question about branding. I'll fumble as I put this to you, but I think there is an important question here. Say the Huffington Post.
Yes.
No fixed costs of printing presses or distribution. No department that knows how to purchase newsprint cheaply from They don't have to worry about any of that. Are they going to be able to develop a brand identity quickly enough? Will they be able to catch up with the Washington Post or indeed the Wall Street Journal? Or are brands, is it the nature of a brand that it takes decades to develop?
No. I think it takes decades, but not necessarily. I think that the Huffington Post is a non-profit organization virtually. They're going to have to charge for it.
Fighting words. All right.
No. Nobody makes money on the internet, very depending on display advertising.
All right.
The only people who make any real money are search and Google, and I think they're going to be under threat from Apple and other people. We're going to see some very interesting battles in Silicon Valley between the giants, but they'll be the two giants that will clash rather than Microsoft.
So new ventures, your judgment then is that new ventures such as the Huffington Post had better be on your radar because they do have a chance at it. If they're smart, they can develop brand identity.
Yeah, they can if they want to, yes. I mean, we're looking at one of the business models we're looking at is offering on the iSlate a bundle of newspapers, which would include some competitors.
I see.
And we're not averse to putting competitors with different views, all for one price, which might be $5, $6 a week or something. Give people a number of newspapers.
I see. Okay. All right. Segment 3, the proprietor. A number of features appear again and again throughout your career. One is the impulse to build. When your father died and you took over the Adelaide News, one regional newspaper, within a few years, which is to say while you were still in your 20s, you purchased the Sunday Times in Perth. You purchased suburban and provincial newspapers in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, the Northern Territory, and you purchased the Daily Mirror in Sydney. Your father didn't do that sort of acquisitive building. You did in your 20s. Where did that come from? Where did that come from?
Well, he did. Well, of course, he was, I thought, a great man, but he had built a great newspaper group, if you like, but as an editor and then a managing editor and chief executive. He didn't own them. And that was in Melbourne, and I experienced that sort of life.
Right.
and couldn't imagine any other life as good as that, as running newspapers or being in that, so involved in current affairs and everything. And there I was in Little Adelaide, and with the Adelaide News in an interesting and cheeky war against a much bigger paper. And we did buy some things, but they were all things that were going broke. And so we had to try and turn things around.
Was there a moment?
Battled. I mean, they were very opportunistic things in the effort to be bigger than just Adelaide.
So did you say to yourself, as a business matter, I have to build in order to continue competing in Australia? Or did you say to yourself, equity, I want to own properties?
No, in order to compete, because so much there was so little we could do just in Adelaide. You know, we were buying cartoons and stories, some features from bigger newspapers in bigger cities. And that was later my same motivation in television, from a little television station in Adelaide, having to take programs from bigger things. And then finally, when I got bigger, I found I had to take them from Hollywood, and it all led to me taking the opportunity, when it came, many years later, the opportunity to actually have a studio where you make your own product.
All right. I still think there's something exceptional there, even though to you it all felt like a natural progression. It's a striking progression.
Well, it was opportunistic. I think it was like London. I'd worked as a cadet almost after I left Oxford for a year on the London Daily Express, and just loved every minute of it, and knew all the people there. And 15 years later, in the midst of coming to the end of a huge war of tabloids in Sydney, I couldn't understand how three of us could survive in Sydney, if only just, and there was only one in the whole of Britain.
Right.
So, I took the first opportunity to jump in there.
Here's another feature. You're leading to another feature of your career, which is taking on the establishment, taking on various establishments. You become proprietor of your father's paper, the Adelaide News, and the big newspaper in town, the Adelaide Advertiser, leans on you and sends your mother a letter pressuring her to sell to them. And what did then 24-year-old Rupert Murdoch do? He published the letter on the front page of the Adelaide News and started a circulation war with the Adelaide Advertiser, and did pretty well out of it. Years later, you're in Britain. The Printers Union is choking the newspaper business in Britain. You secretly begin putting state-of-the-art printing presses in a warehouse in Wapping, an undistinguished suburb of London, and then you suddenly announce that you are moving the Times of London, this mythic property, from Fleet Street out to the warehouse in Wapping, and you just took them. In fact, you tell what happened as a result of that move. The unions did not like it, to put it mildly.
No, we had a horrible strike. We also had the London Sun in a different part, which was printing 4 million copies a day, and the Sun was much less. The Times, rather. The Sunday Times was a big property.
The Sun was, and I believe still remains, the biggest circulation English-language newspaper in the world. Is that not so?
Yes,
right.
Certainly.
All right.
And is doing still very, very well. But what happened was, the unions, I can't begin to describe, the old craft unions and how they behaved and continued to behave with all newspapers. There wasn't a newspaper that didn't lose an edition once a week or do something.
Right.
Or appear full of mistakes because people were fighting for anything. And the publishers always get together once a week as they were going to stand together, and then before they got back to their offices, someone had broken down and given in. So I just waited until I thought I was big enough and strong enough. And things changed. We went out of a Labour government to a Conservative government, although we never had any contact or asked for any help. They automatically did at least protect us with a lot of police and so on. But yes, when the contracts came to an end, we presented them with a new contract, which we knew they would reject. So we just went on printing, but at a different place, and with different distribution over the whole country, which had been planned in great detail for a year. It was a huge operation, and very, very nasty, because we immediately had thousands of people at our front gates,
willing to work, willing to...
No.
The protesting, you mean?
Protesting.
Right.
Not just
It
our
got
strikers,
violent.
but
It got violent.
it's amazing. In the middle of the 80s, it doesn't sound so long ago, but people like the Workers' Revolutionary Party, the Trotskyites or whatever, they all came out on a Saturday night and a Wednesday night. It was like a big night out for them. And the police would be there on their horses, and they'd be throwing darts into the back of the horses, who would rear up, and the television lights would come on. And what was really interesting was that major industrial figures, people like the head of ICI and so on, went on the BBC and say, this is not the British way to conduct relations. But we couldn't get to first base. Anyway, after a couple of weeks, I had a deal with the head of the union, secretly, and who was a very nice lady, and I never heard from her again. She couldn't sell it to the union at all. So they stayed out, and a year later they settled that they'd never come back and take 1 week pay for every year they'd been working for me, and which was half of what I'd offered a year before. And that was it.
You took them
There's
on.
still a lot of bitterness around, but not much.
Right. You faced them down.
We faced them down, and it was, yes.
What establishment?
It was an epic battle. It was the first major, in 50 years, or certainly 40 years, industrial dispute that had been won in Britain by a private employer.
I would argue that it teed up Mrs. Thatcher's battle, the decisive battle with the TUC over the coal mines.
It followed that.
It followed that.
It followed that.
Okay.
That was somewhat of a cue to me.
I see. All right. So what establishment are you taking on now?
Oh, nothing like that. But certainly, I would say the somewhat monolithic liberal press here. I can't buy any newspapers here. I can buy them any number for next to nothing. But my shareholders would be in revolt. Not that they can throw me out, but it would be very destructive of values. But no, we'll get there, and we believe by making far the best newspaper in this country, it will rub off onto others.
Is there room for two national newspapers in the United States?
There should be.
The Wall Street Journal and the New York Times?
Yes, well, the New York Times, we outsell it, outside of New York.
Yes.
We outsell the New York Times by about 3.5 to 1. In New York, they outsell us by about 2 to 1. So we're starting a new edition in New York with an extra 10 pages or so. I don't know how many pages, 8 or 10 pages of just New York
You just
news.
can't resist a fight. Segment 4, Liberty. As an undergraduate at Worcester College, Oxford, you attended meetings of the Communist Club of Oxford, and you kept a bust of Lenin in your rooms. 3 decades later, you'd become a friend and champion of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Explain yourself.
Well, I grew up, but actually it wasn't the Communist Party. It was the,
Were you just playing at it when you were...
It was the Labour Club.
Labour
Club,
Club.
But
you supported Labour when Clement Attlee was Prime Minister. Clement Attlee was in his final year, if I remember correctly, as Prime Minister.
My tutors were lecturing me that, the world had changed and the welfare state was the new thing and so on. And,
So at the age of 21,
Clement Attlee wasn't all that bad a Prime Minister, it so happened. It was his cabinet that was his problem. But, things were different in those days. The Conservative Party was pathetic. We didn't have the real philosophical things going on that you have today.
Okay.
But, I guess being in business and just growing up.
Just growing up. All right. Prime Minister Thatcher privatized one industry after another. Between her taking on the TUC, you're taking on the printers' unions.
We supported her all
the way through. Ronald Reagan cut taxes and reduced regulations, and in both Britain and America today, 2 decades later, the impulse is just the reverse, toward expanding the state, toward rolling back the Thatcher achievements and the Reagan achievements. Are you surprised? Did you think Thatcher and Reagan had made permanent progress? Are you surprised to see
I
it?
thought they had, and I still think they have. We're coming back. I mean, just look at what's happening here, what the mood of this country is today. The western part of the world, if you will,
right,
North America and Europe, are questioning all the precepts of capitalism. the two countries that are screaming for more capitalism are China and Brazil. And I think we're getting into some very dangerous territory here, where with these deficits, where China is now our greatest creditor and lets us know every week as rudely as they can.
Right. Now, you write again, in a golden age of freedom. In late 1978, Deng Xiaoping faced a China devastated by years of Mao's misrule. He made a courageous decision to embrace the market by every measure: diet, education, life expectancy. Chinese today are better off than their parents or grandparents. The Chinese have been liberated. To what extent does the fantastically rapid growth in China represent an opportunity for the United States? And to what extent does it represent a political, perhaps even a military danger?
Well, I hope it's not a military danger, but I fear that.
You do fear it. You do fear it. You
well,
consider
slightly.
You do.
I think, we should be doing a lot more. I mean, the Chinese Navy is already building better submarines than we are, and more of them. They're expanding into Africa enormously,
Right.
buying anything they can get. Are they going to try and, make the Indian Ocean a Chinese lake, or the Pacific Ocean? I mean, they're big things to say, but
Right.
I think, within the Chinese character, they're very, very proud of their material progress that they've made, and the position where there are greatest data, and they're making up for the bad few hundred years that the Western powers gave them. They have long memories.
Right. Right. Let me take you to the particular point of friction at the moment. Google. Google in mid-December detects a cyber attack. I'm quoting you now from Google documents. Google loses intellectual property of its own. It discovers that at least 20 other companies are targeted in this attack. And I'm quoting a Google document. A primary goal of the attackers was accessing the accounts of Chinese human rights activists. Close quote. What is Google doing about it? I quote again. We will be discussing with the Chinese government the basis on which we could operate an unfiltered search engine, if at all. We recognize that this may well mean having to shut down Google China and potentially our offices in China. Close quote. Is Google playing this right? What do the Chinese think they're doing?
Well, I'm in a minority here, but I believe they are.
That Google is playing it right.
Yes, and I'm probably in a minority even if I know the people who are running Google. But at least one of the major controllers and owners of Google, who had his youth in Russia, has made this a great point of principle. And I think that,
and he is right to do so.
And I think it's very brave. I don't think I think they're going to lose their business. I don't believe
the Chinese will stand firm.
Yes, the Chinese are not going to lose face and change their rules.
Okay.
Not under the glare of this publicity.
Should Google, could Google have handled it quietly?
It may be quite different.
Well, should Google have handled it more quietly, or you think they're exactly right to face the Chinese and make a point?
Yes,
you do.
Yeah.
Do the Chinese?
I mean, they could have gone and complained privately and so on, but it wouldn't have changed anything. And they would have had to explain why they were pulling out.
And do the Chinese understand the repercussions of this throughout the Western world? Every businessman who's doing business with China is now says to himself, wait a moment, at the next shareholders meeting, somebody's going to stand up and say, why am I not being as brave as Google? Where are the principles of... Isn't that going to put everybody who's doing business with China, including you, in a tight spot?
I don't do business with China. We have a few minor investments. We don't operate anything in China.
Oh, you don't? Oh, all right. Everything is based outside. So, but do you reckon the Chinese know what they're doing here?
No, you're going through a period in China where the regime, or those who are in control of the regime, or have the majority in the regime,
right, are
clamping down very, very hard on any sort of free expression, and their own local newspapers and everything. Their term will be up in about 3 years, and then we'll see. I think there are a lot of things going on, within I'm speculating, but within the sort of the inner Central Council of 9, and the Conservatives have the majority at the moment. But you're going to see when the next regime comes in, nothing dramatic, but the beginning of an opening up.
From a golden age of freedom. By 2025, about 520 million Chinese should reach the upper middle class. These people want the same things we do. Good housing, a first-rate education for their children. By 2025, will the Chinese also want and perhaps have attained some measure of democracy?
2025 is pretty soon. But yes, I believe you'll have the Communist Party like an umbrella, but there are wings of the Communist Party, and the debates that go on between them now behind closed doors will begin to go on in the public eye. The Chinese are very nationalistic, very patriotic people. I don't see it falling apart or there being a revolution there at all, but will political debate become more open? Yes, I think it will.
All right. Segment 5, our final segment, the difficult task of getting paid. Rupert Murdoch, in his December testimony to the Federal Trade Commission, quote, "We need to do a better job of persuading consumers that high-quality, reliable news and information does not come free. The critics say people won't pay. I believe they will." Close quote. You believe because that's a gut instinct based on all your years of business? You believe because you've focus tested it?
Oh, focus tested it, yes, but I don't have great faith in focus tests.
You don't?
But, I mean, a point, an example, is the Kindle, which is great for reading books, but is not a great newspaper experience. But almost without solicitation, about 30,000 people buy the Wall Street Journal on the Kindle every day.
Really?
Yes.
With no marketing effort to speak of?
None from us, no. So that's okay. It'll be totally different when you get the iPad.
I was going to say, what is the iPad?
And there will be other iSlates or whatever. You get it in 4 colors. You'll be able to do anything on that. You'll be able to do your search, you buy books, see. You can watch movies, television shows, and certainly any number of newspapers.
All right. Here, Emily Bell, who runs the website of The Guardian, which is a big website. The Guardian has a big online readership.
They've made a big long-term investment.
And her reply to the notion that readers will pay for online comment runs as follows, and I am quoting her: "Rubbish, bonkers, a form of madness," close quote. Now, in your mind, this is not even a debate anymore. She's just wrong, and that's all there is to it?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Just over a week ago, as you and I talked, the Wall Street Journal went behind a paywall. You can't get it unless you pay for it now. Can you tell results? What's the metric by which you're going to...
Yes, we've actually had an increase in circulation, electronic. Well, WallStreetJournal.com.
Right.
Yes. Was always behind a paywall, except for all the editorial comment and op-ed pages. And we put a lot of that now behind a paywall, and it's caused a reaction upwards in people buying and subscribing to WSJ.com.
So it's working.
Yes.
All right. Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google, quote, "In general, the models that require readers to pay for online content have not worked for general public consumption. So my guess is that for niche and specialist markets, it will be possible to charge for online content, but I think it is unlikely that you will be able to do it for all the news." So if I were to take Schmidt's observation and play devil's advocate, I'd say, Mr. Murdoch, you're going to be able to pull it off with the Wall Street Journal because that has such a clear brand and because so many people rely on it for a specific kind of information, financial information. But although it moves me to tears to say so, because I so love it, the Post might not work online. And how do you reply to that?
Oh, I disagree totally.
You do?
Absolutely. I think there are certain sections of the Post, particularly. I think it's a very intelligent paper, the way it handles politics and all. But what people like about the Post, I mean, there are groups of people women who live on page 6. I can't understand it. But much, much bigger groups of people.
Page 6 is the gossip
who
page.
recognize it as the best sports paper and best sports coverage, and they'll buy it. But, you know, they won't be buying it at these prices. We won't be using paper. We won't be using trucks.
Right.
It'll come out on Wi-Fi and be picked up on these readers, and we'll be able to, you know, make a very economic and attractive package to people.
Let me ask you a question about that then. So this stuff is expensive, print and newsprint and the distribution.
You bet.
5 years from now, 10 years from now, when will this cease to be available as a physical object? Do you have a plan in mind, or at least a notional number? How long can you afford to carry those fixed costs?
We think people will be buying papers and enjoying papers and the tactile experience, everything. Probably for decades, but certainly for one, but at least two.
All right, okay. Final couple of questions.
But we think we will reach a vastly bigger audience once you see things like the iPad out there.
You love the iPad. That's going to make a difference.
Well, I'm a bit sold on it because they were up here yesterday with it, but and we were all playing with it, and we were all very impressed.
Okay. Final couple of questions.
And you know, but there'll be so many applications on it that they have, which if you have an iPhone, they're starting with it.
Right.
That a lot of people will go to an application like, where's the best restaurant in my suburb, or where's this or that you'll find that will eat into the Google search.
I see.
Which is an interesting sideline to this.
I see. All right. This year, Fox News is expected to produce some $700 million in operating profits. 20th Century Fox, you haven't even started to book the profits from Avatar, which apparently is going to be the biggest selling movie in history.
Not necessarily the most profitable, but yes.
Oh, it was an expensive picture to make.
Very expensive picture to make, very expensive picture to distribute, and so on. And, you know, we'll do probably $700 million or so in this country, of which
700 million net, or
no, gross,
okay.
Of which 60% will go to through the Fox coffers, shall we say?
All right.
And internationally, the rest is about 42% or something like that. In the case of China, it's about 15%.
I see.
That then goes into the we get a distribution fee on all that. The director gets a percentage, and then we laid off to because we thought it was such a risky film. We laid a lot of the risk off.
Don't tell me with credit default swaps.
No. But what it means is that we were never in danger of losing money on it.
Okay.
We run a very conservative studio, but we will do very nicely out of it. Don't worry.
All right. So, television, film, hugely profitable, and yet everybody who knows you will say that Rupert Murdoch still cares about newspapers.
Sure.
Why is that? Why don't you just say, oh, let's just carry these, but let's all our emphasis on on film and television, these wonderfully profitable.
Well, I'm just a curious citizen, and I love to know what's going on in the world and be part of it. And it's different every day, and it's a great challenge. Particularly, what I love about a newspaper is you can always produce a better one the next day or the next edition. It's a constant work, whereas to make a film, it's often 2 years of agony.
All right. Your grandfather was a minister. Your father, I'm quoting once again from A Golden Age of Freedom, this is you. I was raised in a newspaper family by a father who believed that the newspaper was among the most important instruments of human freedom. My father said that the press must be more than merely free. It must be fact-finding and truth-seeking to the limit of human capacity and enterprise. I put it to you that hard-boiled businessman though you may be, at some level, you're a missionary. It may drive your investors mad, but at some level, you feel a missionary impulse. Will you let that stand, or will
I will let that stand proudly, and I thank you. Yes.
Rupert Murdoch, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Rupert Murdoch, founder and chairman of the News Corporation, thank you. I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge. Thanks for joining us.